go live, check to see that video remains as 16 by 9. That's a very important part of the live show. Yeah, 16 by 9. Obviously the greatest aspect ratio that mankind has ever created and ever will create it. I don't think we're ever going to top 16 by 9. I'm going to have a sip of coffee to start us off. Ooh, some good crema on this coffee. It's decaf. For those of you that are tracking, I'm drinking decaf, so you don't get to catch me in an integrity breach. And one of the things you'll notice as soon as one of the things you're going to notice is the quality of this mic right here is through the roof. There's no compression whatsoever on my voice right now. But it's also picking up every little thing I do. You can hear my foot on the chair there. You can hear my sweater on the chair. Like if I'm Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. Feels like I'm moving at an incredible rate. You can hear any slight saliva in my mouth. So I got to be really responsible with the power of a mic like this. You'll notice anytime you start to take on any kind of practice in service of something and then share it publicly, people are going to become they're going to become shitty life coaches for you. And what I mean by shitty life coaches is that they're going to kind of make it their job to point out your inconsistencies. So like if I say that I'm not drinking caffeine, then people become very sensitive to when I'm drinking a coffee or a tea on the show. And I have to be like, well, it's decaffeinated. And then people will be like, yeah, but there's actually some caffeine in that. So Adam, you're actually not as cool as you think you are. And I, of course, say thank you very much. It was very helpful for me. I needed to be taken down a peg there. So that's just a funny thing we do as humans. And I think my theory is we do that to alleviate our own concerns about ourselves. Oh, it's not so bad that I'm not doing this because that monk over there is actually not so good either, and so blah, 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 blah. It's kind of the way that comparison gets used to alleviate looking in the mirror for ourselves. Anyhow, the most important thing you need to know about that is that coffee tastes delicious, and check this out. Yeah. Adoring fans. That's my influencer audience right there. Ooh, mysterious audience. What else do we have on this review? Oh, crickets, when I'm not very good. Little rim shot. Where's the one I want to hear? Ah, yes. The sad trombone on my soundboard is a bright green, fun-looking button instead of like a morose purple. So it's sort of like, which button is the sad trombone? Oh, it's even a sad trombone for the sad trombone sound. It's very meta. Anyhow, as some of you who have listened to these midweek episodes know, who have come to listen to the live show, this is the portion of the live show where we clear out everyone that might be like a potential listener, where people are like, this guy's a moron. They all leave, and then we get to the good stuff, the ontological leadership, the distinguishing. So don't worry, that's to come. A friend of mine once described, I was asking for some acknowledgement. I'm going to loudly rearrange these crystals on my desk. A friend of mine once gave me some acknowledgement. He said, Adam, there's this idea in influencer work or like leadership work or like media presence of having 100 raving fans. You just focus your attention on those 100 raving fans, and you are the epitome of that. And so I worked to take that like positively, like, okay, God, I'm not going to be the influencer with 10,000 followers. I'm going to be the influencer with 100 raving fans. And this sort of early segment to these shows, I feel like helps ensure that, helps get people off. I didn't mean that to sound the way it came out. But hey, if this is getting you off, that's great too. I'm here for you. So let's see, this week, before we get into our topics, we got a bunch of good topics. Sidebar, I've got these headphones on because I'm loving the way my voice sounds in this mic. So you're not the only one enjoying this. I've got 0 viewers right now, but I've got the most important viewer, which is my ears. And they are loving this content. It's top quality. So this week, there have been a few things up for me. One of them is that The Forge, the program Bay and I lead in service of developing transformational coaches and leaders, has been going for about 6 weeks. So we're a month and a half in, and there's a couple dynamics showing up. The whole premise of The Forge, when I talk to about it, that are like outside of my world, that don't necessarily know what I do or have a deep understanding of it, is I share with them that like we're intending to support people to create transformation. The gate we have to pass through to create transformation is our own confrontation. And the way that is set up is that everything that keeps me feeling safe and like with a degree of familiarity and rationality and like known and like this is the world as I understand it, this is the world that's not confronting to me, that's the world of what we know, that's the world of like our understanding of the way the world works. And in the Forge, we're intending to move you outside of that. So we create a container that's going to nudge you outside of your perceived notion of what's correct or right or acceptable or safe or whatever it is. We're going to bump you out of that. And in bumping you out of that, you're going to get confronted. So for some people, they might have like, there's a correct way to lead. They might come into this work with that. And then we're going to lead in the way that we, after our, like, some odd 15 years of experience here, we're going to lead in what I would assert would be like a more fully expressed way. And that's going to be confronting for people when we start to show up in a way that's outside of their perceived, here's the right way to do it. And that's going to create confrontation for them. And then they're going to show up in whatever manner they've learned to show up when they're confronted. And that can be a million different ways. It's different for all of us. There's kind of like 4 core ways that you're familiar with, which would be fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Right? These are kind of like the 4 big Fs, trauma Fs. But really, those are just like the varieties of how we show up when we're confronted. And then there's like nuance to all of them. The way you fight might be direct aggression, or it might be subtle, underhanded undermining. Those are both versions of fighting. So all of that kind of is going on, and that's the intention of this container. It's the intention of the program is that not that we be dicks and just confront you, but that we are supporting you to get exposure to something that exists outside of what you're comfortable with, and that we recognize in doing so, that's going to have you feel confronted, and then you're going to show up the way you show up when you're confronted. And this year, the program builds on itself. It seems to grow year over year. So we've got a lot of like powerful people, a lot of feisty people, a lot of people with a lot of experience in the realms of coaching or leadership. And the more experience you have, the more attached you become to the way you have typically done things. Like if you've been doing something for 6 months, it's much easier for you to be confronted by something new and say, oh, maybe I just don't know. Whereas when we work with someone who's led in like corporate for 20 years, they've got a lot of stories about knowing the right way to do things. And so they're more entrenched in it, and thus their confrontation is going to be stronger, and they're going to be more attached to it, and they're going to have a harder time letting go of it. And so, given all of these factors, the Forge has been up. We've had a lot of energy to kind of hold and work with, and part of our job when people get confronted is not to take it personally, not to make it meaningful, not to take it on. Like if someone is confronted and says like, I think you guys are jerks and I don't think you understand your work at all. That's easy to take on board. And we're humans, so that does land with us at first. And then our job is to take on our work with our teachers, work with our coaches, so that we can come back to a quantumous way of holding that, a neutral way of holding that. Really just allow that to exist without having to react to it. And then sit lovingly with these people as they're in their confrontation and sort of take responsibility if that's what's required, but then support them to start to see how this might be their stuff showing up as opposed to our stuff, which in the moment of confrontation, we're almost always certain it's your stuff. You're the thing, you're the problem, rather than, oh, this is something of mine that's being poked at, some worldview that I have that I'm not aware of yet that's being challenged. So it's been a challenging 6 weeks. It's been a lot for us to hold. More has happened, and like the energy of the Forge has been greater than we've typically been used to. So it's been like a lot, a bit heavy for us to hold at times. We've needed a lot of support. Like we've been leaning heavily on our teachers and our coaches and stuff like that, our support structures. And maybe not as fully as I would benefit. I think, just distinguishing for myself, I probably would have really benefited from reaching out more and getting more acknowledgement from my friends, from my support structures, just reminders that I don't suck. Because when you have a lot of people telling you suck, that's not all of how it's been, but like just using that as an example, it's really important to get reminders, hey, you don't suck. You're pretty cool. You're a pretty cool dude. So that's been up for us. That's been one of the things that's been up this week. And another thing that's been up for me has been in the face of all that, I'm integrating over my last sitting and ceremony. I'm just at the end of the 2 weeks. Usually it's about a 2 week window for integration. And I notice, as I have been over the last, you've heard me talk about this quite a bit, there's been a lot of stillness and a lot of like not doing that much. I haven't felt very moved to write. So I have to I'm in the practice of letting that be and trusting that when it is time for me to write or to share, that will come forward, as it did this morning. And I'm noticing in that stillness, there's a part of me that's starting to become more reactive, that's seeking some excitement. So I've not really been playing many video games as of late. I've not been doing too much, mostly just sitting around the house, sitting quietly, meditating, eating healthy, kind of boring. Or maybe a better way to put it is like kind of drama free. And there's a part of me that I can feel is like seeking drama, like loading up Banana Republic or J. Crew and like, what's a new piece of clothing that I could buy? And then there's a deeper part of me that's like, I don't really want to contribute to like the, what would we call it? Like the fashion industrial complex, the fast fashion, the like buy clothes, throw them out. Oh, well, no big deal. But there's another part of me that really craves that drama, that like hit of energy that would happen when that package arrives. I could try on a new piece of clothing, all of that sort of stuff. And it would be very like short-term satisfying to scratch that itch. The same way when you have chickenpox and you scratch it in the short term, it's very satisfying, but in the long term, it actually doesn't really do that much. And it kind of reactivates the skin and makes it even more sensitive and you itch even more. So it's kind of an interesting place to find myself. Let's have a little more coffee. I'm not going to take away this decaf coffee hit, though. This is all good. I can tell I'm due for a beard trim today. I'm scheduled to get my beard trimmed along with my mustache, and I can tell because even as I wax my mustache to get it out of my mouth and curl these cool little edges, I can tell that I'm due because more and more food is getting caught in my mustache. Get more coffee caught in my mustache as that's not coffee there, is it? No. As I take drinks because it's getting too long. So, diagnostic. Oh, thanks. My Bluetooth speaker just let us all know that it's charging. Super helpful. I'm just going to open a window here to cool this room off, and then we're going to get into the juicy stuff. There we go. Lovely stuff. We are light on viewers today. And by light, I mean 0. That's cool. That means I can say the good stuff. People will catch us after the fact, but it's nothing like it when it's live. They're missing out on awesome, awesome, awesome stuff. Let's see if there's anything else going on for me right now. No. No, there's nothing else going on for me right now. I'm coming off an injury. My knee has been a little bit tweaked, and I notice it heals a little slower as I'm pushing through my 40s, which is annoying because I like sports and it feels good to move my body and get some exercise. But we're in that period where I just have to like sit still and let it do. Whoever this one viewer is, can you confirm for me that you can hear me? Because I have a concern that my mic's not coming through and that I'm the only one hearing this amazing sounding voice coming through this mic and this diaphragm. So we've got a bunch of good topics. Good morning, Tommy. Okay, I'm guessing you can hear my voice. It's nice to have you here. Not alone. Oh, what a relief. This is what happens when I start earlier. Usually if I start earlier, people are like, I'm not getting there at 9:45. Oh, that kind of time. I'm scheduled for 10. That's when I'm showing up. So the first topic we've got today is from Monica. Thanks, Monica Burrell. And she suggested as a topic, can you talk about your thoughts on using AI for coaching? In the future, when it evolves, what would AI need to crack in order to do transformational coaching? So this is becoming, of course, a hotter topic as time goes on because we've got ChatGPT, which is revolutionary in some ways, or maybe like it's the most advanced language prediction program we've ever gotten. So I'm going to talk about what a language prediction program is, how that works, and how that's kind of operating with this stuff. So what this form of artificial intelligence does, it's not really intelligence as we know it. I mean, I guess you could argue there's an intelligence to it, But it's not intelligence the way a human brain is intelligent, the way we can like deduce and induce and like formulate and abstract and think about things and manipulate objects in our mind and then speak them into the space, all of that sort of stuff. What ChatGPT does, what a language prediction engine does, is it first absorbs or ingests a huge quantity of information. This is called training it. So it absorbs like art, it absorbs whatever, it absorbs language. ChatGPT primarily works by absorbing language. It absorbs written word. And then perhaps over time, they'll be able to like absorb spoken word, like for example, this podcast, that sort of thing. And the way it does that, it like break it down into like text and then it would ingest the text. And then it can form like a profile. It can say, this is the way that Adam Quiney speaks. This is the way that Seth Godin speaks. This is the way that Kara Schwisser speaks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can say, can you write me a post about this in the style of Adam Quiney? And what it's doing is a couple things. First, it's looking at like it's taking all of the information it's ingested and it's looking at like what is the kind of like content that would be written given everything I've ingested. And then second, okay, given that's the thing I would write, now what is the style? What is the way that Adam Quiney tends to write given everything I've ingested of his? And then it puts together like a thing for that, a post, a response. And when we do this, it looks miraculous. When we ask it to do it and we get it back, we're like, holy mackerel, this thing's super smart. But it's not really as smart as we think it is. It's just highly efficient, given all of the data it has, at predicting what's the paragraph that's going to follow this paragraph. What's the paragraph that would typically start something off like this? It doesn't actually understand why that paragraph is that particular paragraph. It doesn't really understand the words included in that particular paragraph. It just understands this is more or less what that first paragraph would look like. And this second paragraph is more or less predictably what the kind of paragraph that would follow from that. And then it's almost like it's overlaying a style called Adam Quiney's style over top of that. So like the first one, okay, I've read 6 billion essays on Homo sapiens. Generally speaking, this is the way that first paragraph is going to start, given this prompt that we've been given. And then, given that truth, the next paragraph that will follow will start to introduce some points that we're going to argue, and then the third paragraph that's going to follow is going to be to begin going into that first point, and so on and so forth. So when we see this and we don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, it occurs truly miraculous. It occurs like, whoa, this thing gets it, like more than most humans do. But what it actually is able to do is predict with a high degree of accuracy how language gets parsed out and what makes sense in terms of our written word. That's still incredible. It's just not quite the miracle that we kind of hold it out to be at first. It can be a little bit of a surprise as we start to pull apart open up the hood and look into what's going on. And second, even though it's still incredible, it's distinct. So like being able to put that first paragraph there and then understanding why in terms of its own framework would be quite a bit different from putting that first paragraph there. And then, you could ask like, why did you put this first paragraph there? And it's going to do more language prediction. It's going to go, okay, given this kind of answer, what is that? What is predictably the kind of answer that's given here? I'll synthesize that. It's a 55% this, 33% the other stuff. We'll go with that, blah, 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 puts it out. It's hard for us to trust that that's what's happening because we're kind of caught by like the accuracy sometimes. So as time goes on, now that I've laid all of that out, we can talk about like a Turing test, and then we can talk about AI and coaching. A Turing test is a test created by Alan Turing. It's a hypothetical test. It's not like a test that exists. We have examples of it, but it's a hypothetical test. And the Turing test basically is a test to determine like how have we gotten to the point where a computer is sufficiently advanced that we're unable to distinguish it from a human being. So the classic Turing test is you put whatever your AI is in a black box that's sealed, and you can't see any of the inner workings of the black box. All you can do is input something and then it'll output something. Hey, Monica, we're just talking about your topic, AI, starring Haley Joel Osment. That dude really fell off the map, didn't he? Poor child actors. They got it rough. It seems so good, but Hollywood's a dangerous place to be when you're at a very young age, I think. So the Turing test, you put this AI into a black box, you have no insight into it, and we put it in front of a human who has no awareness of what they're dealing with. And they can't peer into this black box. The only thing they can do is input. And in this example, we'll say you can input by asking questions or speaking, and then it'll output. And so the machine passes the Turing test when the person outside of that black box is unable to distinguish the AI in the black box from a human being that we'd put in the black box. There's no way they can tell the difference. So these AIs, ChatGPT and so on, and Super Bing or whatever Microsoft is unloading, and you know all this stuff, they're getting closer and closer to like pretty impressive answers to the Turing test. Like at first glance, you'd be like, "Whoa, this is pretty impressive." And in the early stages of the Turing test, the machine would fail like, you know, in the first 30 seconds. Like about 20 years, maybe the early days of the internet, maybe the early aughts, so like early 2000s, there was this thing going around that was like internet psychologist or something, robot psychologist, and you would say like, it'd be like, what are you struggling with? You say, I'm struggling with feeling sad. And then the machine would have like a set of questions they'd ask you that at first glance appeared quite reflective. And they'd be like, well, what do you make feeling sad mean? And you say like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And then it'd say, tell me more about this. So it's kind of like going through this canned list of questions, but it's not volunteering too much. And it's really just inviting you into your own reflection. And so for the first like 5 minutes, you might be like, damn, this is amazing. But then it starts to loop and starts to ask the same questions. And you start to be like, oh, yeah, I can really feel that this is not really a human being here with me. It's what's happening is that it's just asking me a series of canned questions that support me to reflect on myself. And so in about 5 minutes, the Turing test would fail. You're pretty clear. These newer models, these language prediction models, these higher, more advanced AI that have ingested more of our content, they can go longer. They can go further along before that Turing test fails. So with ChatGPT, you could sort of have a conversation, and sometimes it's going to become pretty clear pretty quick, and sometimes maybe longer. Maybe it'll take 10 minutes before you're like, oh, okay, I'm really clear now. This is not a human. So in a way, you could also say like sociopaths kind of operate with this model too. And like Keith Raniere, the founder of Nexium, now in jail for all kinds of horrible things, he wrote this fascinating article. I'm going to try to Google it right now, which is going to sound mega fucking loud in this microphone, but I really want to share it with you because it's fascinating. Here we go. Where is it? Find me that link. Here it is. Then I can copy it. And I put it over here. Pow. Put that in the chat. Fascinating. Oh, it can't be shared because of Canadian government legislation. News content can't be shared. Oh, come on now. So what do I have to do? Do I have to put this in a bit.ly? Can I defeat this bit.ly? And I go here. Here's a super long link. You want me to sign up to get my link? Oh man, come on. Well, I'll try to figure out some other way to share this. I'm not going to be able to put it in here. I don't want to get too distracted. But it's from the Frank Report. And if you look up Keith Raniere psychopath, you'll find a link back to the Frank Report where he talks about this. And it's fascinating insight into how a psychopath gets created. It's very well distinguished because Keith Raniere, pretty much a psychopath. And he does a beautiful job articulating how that gets created and then where that leaves the person and blah, blah, blah. And so sociopaths, psychopaths tend to operate similarly to a AI machine, which is that they get very sophisticated at approximating in their output human experience and emotions and stuff like that. And you put them in a black box, it becomes very difficult, especially for like an unsophisticated, unconscious person to start to distinguish. And so they're kind of passing the Turing test in a way. And so the Turing test isn't like an art. It's not a one and done. It's almost like each of us as a human is able to run our own Turing test. And we're only going to be able to determine the extent to which someone is a human or not a human, so to speak, to the extent we have access to our own emotional state and our own our own depth. If I have not got, if I'm fairly unconscious, if I've not really done much work into my own psyche, if I've not done much of my own healing, I'm going to be pretty unconscious to the lack of someone else's ability or depth in terms of their own practice. And so I'm not going to be conscious to those flags that show up and are like, hey, by the way, this might be a ruse. This might not be legitimate. So I do think that's the Turing test. Now we can start to talk about like AI and coaching. I think there's a degree to which AI, like as coach, could probably really support people by simply asking the next question that would be predicted by all of the wealth of coaching that it's ingested. But there's always like the capacity for human expression is infinite, and the capacity to approximate that is kind of like always, it's marching along, but it's never going to be able to catch that infinitude. It's going to get close, and then there'll be a point where we drop further below and it doesn't quite have the ability to get there yet. And so it's almost like an arms race in a way. And so now that I've laid all that out, we can talk about like Monica's ultimate question, which is like, do you have thoughts on using AI for coaching, and what would AI need to crack in order to do transformational coaching? I think it's an interesting question, because in the realm of transformation, if you're brand new, just starting out, someone like asking you canned questions might occur for you very powerful. You might be like, whoa, damn. I said, how do I figure out how to make my husband nicer to me? And they just said, ask me a better question. Oh my God, I never considered that wasn't a very good, that like at that point in your journey, that might occur very powerful. And AI is going to be able to approximate that pretty good. But as you go deeper, the shortcomings are going to become more apparent and more apparent and more apparent. And so over time, I think it's inevitable. There's like a falling off. There's a half-life to how well this stuff can capture us. And the heart and soul of transformation lies in our being. It lies not in my ability to have in my mind a great vast assortment of questions that I can ask this person in front of me to like invite them to reflect. The deeper you go into transformation, the more you move away from that and move into the realm of like, who am I being with this person? How does this person need me to be in this moment? And that is not something that can be predicted. That's something that can only exist in the moment. And so any model, I think, this is my take, any model that's based on prediction and like amassing enough data that you can then kind of like make the guess, I think it's forever going to have a degree of shortcoming. It can probably move us forward a great extent. And I think there's probably like the way I divide the coaching profession up and the leadership profession and the therapy profession is that there's like 90% of it, 85%, maybe 80% if we're feeling pretty charitable, is like nonsense. Or that's not even particularly charitable. It's just not very powerful. It's pretty watered down. It's pretty diluted. It's pretty like meh. It helps for a while until it doesn't. It's no big deal. I feel a little bit better after each of my sessions, but after a while I start to be like, is this really worth the money? I can kind of feel better about myself. It's actually kind of more fun if I just go to the bar with my friends. That seems to be, or maybe I'll just go do some mushrooms in the woods, whatever. But as the top 10 to 20% is life-changing transformational magic. And that top 10 to 20% is a function of the practitioner doing an unbelievable amount of their own work, being unflinchingly committed to investing in their teachers, investing in their leadership, investing in their coaches, and making those non-negotiables so that they are always perpetually plumbing further and further into the depths of their own soul and bringing more and more and more of that online. And what I think will happen is that AI will start to pull away from that bottom 80%. I think that people will start to like, talking this thing, I get a few questions, I feel a little bit better. It's a little bit more dynamic than reading it in a book, but it's pretty good. And that divide exists already, right? Like a good book, people love reading a good book on transformation or personal growth because it's nice and safe. It doesn't require the degree of vulnerability. I never have to be fully seen by another human being. I can kind of like work through my problems on my own and then show up in the world having worked through my problems. And that's what that 80% of the profession, the bottom 80% is doing. Is it's like, yeah, it's a little more dynamic than a book. Yeah, it's a little more dynamic, but like really you're not fully seen because the person you're working with is not able to allow themselves to be fully seen because they're not fully engaged in their work. And so I think AI will start to eat into that 80%, but that top 10 to 20%, I don't think it's going to be able to cross that threshold because I think that that threshold is something that can only exist in the moment and only exist when we are influentially engaged in our own work and willing to be truly seen. And AI cannot do that because it is a facade ultimately. There is not an, at least currently, as AI is currently existing, there is not like there's not a cognizant witness. There's not a consciousness seeing us and to be seen. At best, it can approximate that. And on some level, even if it's unconscious, we're always going to feel that lack. And that lack is what has people choose out of that 80% of coaching. It's what has them be like, I'm not getting this because I can pretty much do this with a book and it costs less and it's easier and I can do it on my own time, blah, 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 blah. And I think the same will be true for AI. People will go towards that when they're like, this coach is fine, it's all good, but I can do this. I can ask myself these same questions and it's all the same. So that's how I see that kind of playing out for right now. And we'll see how that goes. That may change as time goes on. Like if AI were to develop genuine consciousness, a genuine awareness of self and an internal state and vulnerability, then maybe things could be different. Then things might change. But currently, machine intelligence has no capacity for vulnerability because it's not programmed in. That's not what we want from it. We don't want my coffee machine in the morning when I push the button to be like, look, Adam, I'm feeling pretty scared. I'm worried you're going to turn me off again. So I actually don't really want to fuck you, make my coffee, bro. Give me my crema. Speaking of which. Oh yeah, that's a good crema. Thank you for your invulnerability, espresso machine. So until that starts to get created, I don't think that transformation can be like pulled into the auspice because it demands that vulnerability. It demands the seeing and the being seen. And that is the most powerful aspect of coaching and leadership in my perspective, is to have a leader who can truly see us. And the only way they can truly see us is to allow us to truly see them. So, great question, Monica. Click this checkbox. Boom, answered. Minimize bullet. On to the next one. Thanks for asking that, Monica. And I really appreciate the thoughts you shared with me in email as well when I asked you what your thoughts were. I'm not going to read them out, but I really appreciated hearing them. So let's go to Seth. Seth has a good topic here. He says, in high school, you get dumped by somebody and it's the, quote, end of the world for a while. And then eventually you meet someone new and bam, the old person isn't even a blip on the radar anymore. If a client of yours brings a romantic hang-up coming from scarcity and anxiety, how do you have them be with it versus helping them break the obsessive pattern so they can move on? So I think the question Seth's asking here is like, knowing that like you have a breakup, it's the end of the world, and then eventually you'll move on. What do you do with someone when they're there? Like, do we try to help them see that like, hey, remember in high school, this was just a blip and that happened, so this is the same thing? Or do we just like let them sit in it and dramatize it? Or like, how do we be with that? So what most people try to do in these situations is when someone is really like hurting from a situation, we try to silver lining them. We try to help them like see like, we try to like, we call ourselves like, I'm the master of the reframe. A lot of coaches love that term. I'm really good at reframing. So you come to me with a problem, you're going to leave with a positive sense. Hey, Jess. But that's not good. And if you're doing that, I invite you to stop doing it. Because what that ultimately is about is you attempting to shift someone out of their current state, out of their felt experience. And the reason you are trying to shift someone out of their felt experience is because you yourself are uncomfortable with that felt experience they're in. So if in my life for the longest time, I had no capacity to be with sadness or like heaviness. I was all like, let's play, let's have fun. It can always be fun. There's no need for sadness. And so I'd be like obnoxious, like when there was a moment with sadness or gravity, I gravity to it, gravitas. I would like make jokes. I would try to like change the mood. I would try to like inject humor so that we could be back in the fun place because I didn't want to be in the sad place. And I would tell myself I'm doing this for them because they need to know that they don't have to hang out in the sadness and you can be happy all the time. But that's actually about my inability to be with the abundance of life. I've got a story that sadness is actually bad on some level. And if I'm not willing to own it as like bad, I would own it as like it's not needed or it's not efficient or you don't have to hang out there, which would be like, oh, I don't think rain is bad. It's just not needed. It's not efficient. We don't have to hang out there. And in fact, sadness we know has value. And the way we know it has value is because it's there. Everything that's there has value. It evolved for a purpose. There is a gift in it if we're willing to sit with it. And so when we're caught in this, like, let me reframe this for them, let's blah, 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 the best place you can start is by recognizing, like, coming to an acceptance of the fact that that's about you, not about them. That's about your inability to be with a particular state that someone is currently hanging out in. So that's step one. That's a coffee moment. The second thing that happens is that we get afraid that people are going to get stuck in this state. Oh man, they're just going to hang out here forever. And that's another reason that we try to reframe so quickly. I need to move this person on. I need to get them out of here because otherwise they're going to be here forever and they're going to get all depressed. And that's one of the reasons we don't like to let ourselves be sad or angry. It's a very common concern I hear from people that are learning to tap into and unlock their heart is to be with the emotions that they have disempowering stories about. I'm worried, Adam. I've got so much sadness in my heart. I'm starting to discover that if I really go there, I'll never leave. That's not the way that emotions work. But you may have flooded yourself with sadness because you spent so long blocking it. So the metaphor I like to think of here is like a dam. It's like there's a river flowing called sadness. And you've got a bunch of rivers: sadness, happiness, joy, anger, fear, whatever. We'll use sadness here. And so what you did was, because you were afraid of sadness for whatever reason, you built a dam. By the way, calling sadness inefficient, that's fear. Because you're afraid of being inefficient and you're afraid of whatever it means about you if you're not efficient. It doesn't occur like fear, like, oh, I'm terrified, but it's fear. It's all fear. So you build this dam blocking the river called sadness. And as you do so, the headlands of the dam flood. Everything behind the dam floods up. And so then when you finally get to the point where you're starting to notice the impact of being flooded, what's called for is removing the dam. And as you do so, all of that water that's been blocked for all these years is going to flood. And so at first, it's going to feel overwhelming. It's going to feel like, oh my goodness, this is never going to end. But it's just that you're flooded. And the irony is that when you move that dam, especially when you're not supported in this process, you might just be like, I'm just going to let myself be sad. And you do it and you're blown out. You're like destroyed because of all this water flooding. And so what do you do at that point? You're like, fuck this. And you re-dam. But you make this dam even stronger because you're noticing like, this is horrible. And so you rebuild that dam even more, and then the cycle continues until the flood builds up to the extent your dam can no longer hold it, blows out all the towns that have been built downriver, build an even stronger dam, and so on and so forth. So our job in these situations is to like be with people as they're in the experience of whatever they're experiencing. And I remember I was in training. I was leading a program down in San Diego, and I was training, and I had a member of my team was just like having a tough time. I think he'd maybe gotten let go by a client or something like that. And I was kind of like trying to reframe it, or maybe ask like some coaching questions that would help him see the positivity. And my leader, the person developing my leadership at this moment, was like, you know, Adam, where you're at right now with this person, like what's going on, is it's kind of like your buddy just lost the ball game, and you're sitting on the stoop with him and just like hearing him, letting him be sad. That microphone picking up that plane? Seems like it's coming through pretty good. You're sitting on the stoop and you're just listening to your friend. You're listening to him share how it sucks, and all you're doing is being with him. And that is a significant part of what we have to do with people, is like sit with them in their process and let them be in the devastation of getting dumped. Because until they get the opportunity to do that, they're never going to learn how to move through it. They're forever going to be doing this thing that if you're a reframer, you've probably learned to do, which is like start to feel a little bit sad and then reframe it quickly so you don't have to feel your sadness. And what that does is it floods you with your sadness because your sadness has nowhere to complete, has nowhere to be resolved. And so what we're really standing in with our clients, with our direct reports, with our children, with our people, when we're doing this, is we're standing in the place that like emotions are okay. And all there is to do is to let them be resolved healthfully. And so part of that work is to recognize, like, if the person's like, I'm really sad and I'm going to go and have a huge drinking binge, and then I'm going to do heroin, and then I'm going to go and like spray paint on my ex's locker what I think about them. Don't do that. Just be with your sadness. And the second thing that we can provide is helping them take the significance out of their sadness. So what that means is like the feeling of being sad will be a real feeling, and it might have a real heaviness to it. But it doesn't mean anything other than that you're sad and that it feels heavy. What happens a lot of the time is people feel sad or angry. Happens a lot with anger. They're feeling angry, and then they're like, I need to act on this anger. And then they want to go and do something like write a big loud letter or like tell this person how I feel or something along those lines. That doesn't help. That's creating significance about our feelings. So the practices in these situations is more often than not to just let someone be sad, to just hang out with them and let them sit there. And as they move through that emotionality, to start to check in and see, like, what are you learning from this process? What are you getting from this? And to the second part of Seth's question, which is like, how do we help them break an obsessive pattern? So there's like this interesting road where on the one hand, it's like we dam the river and then we flood up. The other thing that can kind of happen is that we like pour more water into the river. We're like, I'm sad. And then we really start to like cascade into that. I'm sad. And that this means that I'm a loser. And it means I'm never, we're pouring more water into this. We're flooding downstream even further. And so that's the part where we're just like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean I get that you feel that way. That's okay. But none of that stuff's true. That's just your sadness. You're just sad. And so that's the flip side of this. If we're working with a client and we notice that they've been hung up sad here for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, 4 months, then we might have some other work to do with them. Like, hey, I notice you've been like kind of hooked into this sadness for a long, long time. What's going on? And we might want to explore the story that's operating. We might want to support them to take on something like completion so they can actually complete on this emotion and release it. And often what's happening when people are stuck in an emotional state is that they're getting something out of being that way. Like this person now, it's no longer that they're just sad. It's that they're getting something out of, they're creating an identity about being sad. Maybe their identity is like, I always get dumped. And then hanging on to the sadness allows them to like reinforce that identity. So in those situations, we want to draw attention to that lovingly. But the first and most important place for us to operate is, one, to recognize this is probably some of our own work. I want to move them off of this, so there's some of my own sadness or anger or whatever to lock into, to become present to, and then to just be with them in it. And more often than not, if we can just be with people and what's going on for them, magic will happen. Let's put this phone into Do Not Disturb. Do not disturb me until the end of this event. Boom. Handled. Okay, nailed that one. That gets a check mark. Sweet. So Tara asks a question. She says, can you talk about the relationship between standing for our heart's desire and surrender? So I've talked about this a few times. I'm happy to do it again, as it's a common one. Ultimately, what we're talking about is commitment and surrender. And these two things seem contradictory, like mutually exclusive of one another. How can I be committed to something and surrendered? And so what tends to happen is people swing back and forth between these two extremes. They're like, if you've ever read The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, Robin Sharma's book, I think that's his name. The story is like this guy who was a lawyer and he did all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then he like sold it all. And now he's just like one with the wind, and he travels and he's like a cork bob in the ocean. And not my favorite book as a side. Or they read the Michael Singer's book, The Surrender Experiment, and then they're like, I'm just going to surrender to anything, and I'm not going to choose anything. And that's a fine way to live your life, just as being overly committed and like anxiously attached to getting everything and like burning yourself out. That's a fine way to live your life too. They're both perfectly fine choices. Down the path of the extreme commitment, we kind of get to be at cause to create what we want, but at a cost to our well-being. We're like exhausted, we're drained, we're overly invested in life turning out a particular way, and when it doesn't go the way we want, we're destroyed, and then we have to like recover and blah 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 blah. And down the other end, the surrender, the total surrender end, what you end up with is sort of like a life kind of like a cork bobbing in the ocean. You bounce around, and you get to sort of take the good as it comes, and you take the bad as it comes, and it's like more peaceful in a way, but it also is kind of powerless. You're basically at the effect of what life brings you, as opposed to being at cause for your own commitment. In fact, down the second path, you kind of have to give away your commitment. And so the breakthrough comes by changing our relationship to commitment, reinventing it. And the way we work with this is, one, we have to like start by acknowledging that we have a desire. To be a human is to have a desire. And so what happens with desire is there's something we want, and then over time we become invested in that. And as we take more committed action towards something, we become like more invested in it working out. We really want it. We don't want it to not happen. We're attached to it happening. And then we become, from our attachment, more and more stuff happens. That's the cost of desire. That's part of what happens from having desire. So the first thing you can do is you can kill your desire, and then you can live like a cork bobbing in the ocean. That's an option. And you will not have to worry about attachment. But more powerful and more possibility lies down that other path, which is to recognize, okay, part of me engaging with my desires is that I'm going to get attached from time to time. And the attachment's the issue. So what we want to do is practice noticing when we get attached. And then what do I need to do to let go of that attachment without killing my desire? So how do I allow my desire to exist? How do I allow myself to be committed to a result without becoming attached to it happening or not happening? And this is the heart of, like, we see this in the greatest, most inspiring leaders, the leaders that we hold up like icons. Nelson Mandela, for example, right? What was it, 20 years in jail, I think? And remained committed to that vision. And if he was overly attached to it, jail would have destroyed him, because he would have just been sitting there festering. But instead, he was able to stay committed and then surrendered to what was happening. And so this is the practice. The practice is for us to practice being committed to what we want to create in life, and then surrendered to what happens as we go there. So I'm like, an example would be, what's an example? I have a commitment to grow the Forge beyond a single program, beyond me and Bay, to like, the Forge is the program. The Forge exists in Australia and it exists in Europe and stuff like that. It's not going too well right now. Or maybe it is, I don't know. It's not going the way I want it to. So I have a vision for how that commitment unfolds. And there's stuff that I have to do to make that happen. I've got to teach my team how to enroll themselves. So there's not all me enrolling people in this program. I have to create like training modules, sort of like documents, curriculum kind of, that helps people understand how to lead particular parts. I have to, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of stuff that I have to do. And I have to do like research and figure out like, how would this land in Europe and what would need to be different and how would we make it work and blah, 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 blah. All of that has to happen. And then what happens is life. So I've got a commitment, I've got actions I'm taking, and then life will do things like blow up the Forge, like just with a ton of energy, like it has happened in the last 2 months. And we're like, holy crap, like we got to put our energy here. I don't have energy to put towards that stuff right now. From my attachment, I might like burn myself out. I might get super frustrated that this is happening because I'm meant to be doing that committed thing that I'm, whatever. And instead I have to like surrender to like, okay, this is what's happening now. So given I have this commitment, how do I allow both of these to exist? It's a little bit like being in a boat in the ocean and you're sailing towards a particular destination. but you have to move with the waves in the ocean as it's showing up in the moment. If you're just like, fuck you, ocean, we're going this way, you're going to get broadsided by a wave and then capsized, and then that's the end of your journey. And so we navigate, we allow life to happen as it does while holding like a North Star orienting us, our commitment. And then we continue to take the next committed action towards that thing. So that's how we merge. That's how we transcend the dichotomy of like either I'm committed or I'm surrendered and I don't have to feel attached and all of that stuff. Is that we play to this higher practice where we allow room for life to happen while not having it stop us. I'd really like to be able to say more on this, but the hard part, as it is with a lot of this stuff, is that the best way for me to articulate this is to work with someone. And we're starting, I think in 2 weeks, I'm going to start bringing back live coaching to this show. So once a month, I'll have someone on to live coach them. And hopefully during those times, we'll be able to start to articulate this, to bring this forward so you can kind of get a bit more of an understanding as we work with it in the moment. Great suggestion, Tara. Thank you. Okay, Faison. Hey, Faison has an awesome suggestion here for a topic. He says, can you talk about relating to international calamity in the world? For example, Israel and Palestine. The pressure to take a stand, to get it right, to speak up and act in the face of injustice, to ask higher order questions. That was a great topic because I don't have a clear, clean answer to it. Just where I sit with it. So bear with me. I have to gather my thoughts on this one so I get it right. I'm going to pressure to take a stand here. So for me, this all begins with my stand. And most of the time when we take a stand with stuff like that, it's pretty reactive. So our stand tends to be like one side's doing wrong and I stand for the other. And that's been the case for like Israel and Palestine forever. Like anytime you engage with that question, like one side will argue this, the other side will argue that, and someone will be like, well, you don't understand this, and blah, 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 and it just becomes like this tug of war. And there's not much resolution in that. There hasn't been. And so the stand I take as a starting point is like compassion and the belief that humans, for the most part, want to do good. That's a bit tricky when we've got things like Hamas, which, at least as far as I can tell, seems to be a terrorist organization. And the terrorist organization has one mission, which is to bomb Israel off the map. So that's really challenging, right? That's like a tough place to hold compassion for someone. But for me, I want to I want to start from the place of compassion and understanding on a deeper level what's going on. So one level of understanding would be like they're terrorists and terrorists have become radicalized. And the only way to deal with that is to stop them. And that's kind of like another version of like bomb them off the map. My mustache is poking me here. Let's do a little nose pick. It's not that different, right? It's like, well, they're trying to bomb someone off the map, so what we should do is bomb them off the map, except for us, it's justified. And the trouble with that stand is that like, well, that's exactly their position. So you've got two sides now making the same argument. And where's that going to result? Bombing both of them off the map. It's not really what we're aiming for. There's not really a resolution in that. So for me, I really want to understand, like, what are the situation, like, how does whatever side I'm looking at, how does it make total sense? From the lens of people ultimately want to do good, people ultimately are good people ultimately are. And what that does is it has me start to look at, like, what would lead to someone arriving at this as the only conclusion? What circumstances would have to be happening to have someone arrive here? And what that does for me is it invites me to go deeper into what's happening. And it invites me to go deeper into the very people I don't want to bring any compassion to. It's very challenging. You know, you can do this with Germany in World War II. That's a very challenging place to look, but it's an excellent exercise if you really want to practice this and become masterful in this. How can I find compassion here? What would lead someone to do something this horrific? And there's always the off ramp of evil. We can always end up there. We can always end our inquiry by saying they're evil and evil people do evil things. But at least for me, I find that's a bit of like letting myself off the hook of trying to find the compassionate answer. It's not to tell you can't do that, or that it's wrong if you do that, or that you should do it my way. I'm just intending to share my approach to this, how I try to work with this stuff. And the reason I do that is because I find if I can understand what's going on at a level of depth that lines up with compassion and understanding, then we can start to create like solutions, or at least, if nothing else, ways of relating to these people involved from that place of compassion. We might do the exact same thing on the surface. You know, if someone is bombing, if a terrorist organization is bombing someone else, you probably just have to like stop that. You probably have to just do something about that. And there's not much else you can do. But we can, the doing, the actions we take can come from a very different place. So imagine we have like a child, one brother, a younger brother who's hitting his older brother. Or maybe we'll do it the other way around. Older brother's hitting his younger brother. I was the older brother. So I'm hitting my younger brother. And what needs to happen is my parents need to stop that because I'm causing harm to my younger brother. Now, they are going to take that action one way or the other. They're going to stop me from hitting my younger brother. But who they're being about it can be radically different underneath the action they're taking. So on the one hand, they could just be like, Adam's evil. And so the energy when they're stopping me is going to be pretty cold. It's going to be pretty, perhaps ruthless. And it's probably going to be like, there's probably going to be like, you're wrong, Adam, for doing this. And I'm going to feel that. It's going to land in my nervous system. On the other side, they might be like, what they could get really curious, like, what's having Adam do this? And maybe Adam's feeling like insecure about his younger brother getting all the attention. I'm just making shit up here. And so if they were to stop me hitting my brother from that lens, they might be more compassionate or more caring or gentler or whatever. But that's going to come through the energetic field. And either way, I'm going to get stopped, and I'm going to have a reaction to being stopped, like a natural reaction that's all mine. Like, I'm wrong, or here we go, my freedom is curtailed once again, or like, I feel this is hypocritical because my brother hits me all the, all of that stuff. But who they're being as they stop me is going to either cushion what I'm creating myself, or it's going to add to it. And so in a lot of these conflicts, what we tend to do is we come down on one side or the other, and then we make the side that we didn't come down on wrong. And then we try to stop their energy and we make them wrong for it. And all that does is further entrench people. It radicalizes people. The more you feel made wrong, the more you will become righteous. The more you will double down on how you feel. Because when you're made wrong for something, there's no way for that something to complete. There's no way for it to be brought out into the air and talked about and like really assessed. And I want to be super clear that like what I'm talking about here doesn't change what's going on. Like this is what I do. This jerk over here in Victoria, British Columbia does. This isn't going to change the way things are going on in the East, in the Middle East. But if we all practice this a little bit more, what happens is more compassion gets created in the world. And if we create more compassion in the world, then these things don't go as far as they go. And as we do that, we start to heal ourselves, and healed people heal. Being around someone who is healed is healing. And so as that happens, it's almost like the stuff gets healed from the ground up. Another way to put it is like, imagine a whip. And what's hurting me is like the tip of the whip cracking into my skin. It's breaking my skin. It's causing me harm, damage, blah, blah, blah. And so what we want to do is like stop the tip of the whip from hitting me. And stopping, like having a conversation with the person holding the whip is not going to immediately stop that tip from cracking across my skin. But what it'll do is it'll stop that person, which will then stop the hand that shakes the whip, which will then stop the wave that travels down the wind, which will eventually stop that tip from cracking on me. But it'll take longer. It's faster, just grab the tip and stop it from breaking against my skin. So this is what I try to do in terms of like the me over here. And then let me just see, I had another note on this I want to talk about. I guess I just want to share, like, for me, don't really think that there's a right answer to these sort of problems. Like, personally, I think Israel is in like an impossible situation. We'll work with Israel and Palestine, then we'll talk about Russia and Ukraine. So, like, I think Israel is in an impossible situation. They're surrounded by enmity. I think that's what it is, enmity, like people that are hostile to them. And we don't realize how fortunate we are in North America. Like, America is surrounded by Canada, Mexico, and 2 oceans. And Canada is surrounded by the States and 3 oceans, more or less. We got Russia like across the globe, but so it's like we don't have an appreciation of how safe that is and what that breeds. Like, it's the difference between a nervous system that knows it's safe and a nervous system that knows it's continually under attack. And so Israel's in an impossible position where they're surrounded by people that want them gone. And then Palestine is in an impossible position too, because on the one hand, you've got Palestine with the PLO, with Yasser Arafat's like gang, crew, whatever, and they've worked for like peace and like a peaceful solution. That mustache is really driving me nuts this morning. And on the other hand, you have Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which is a terrorist organization that are doing these things to Israel. And the challenge I find is that, like, when things are like this, we crave certainty, because that provides us like some like, okay, at least I know where I stand. But often the thing that resolves stuff like that is our ability to sit in the tension, to sit in that dissonance, to sit in a willingness to be with discomfort and to like not have a clear answer and to not have like a clear they're right, they're wrong. We love it when someone's right and someone's wrong. If you look at Harry Potter, it's like the epitome of this, right? Like, Voldemort, dude's evil. Harry Potter, dude's good. Easy. But the truth is much more like Oz or like Game of Thrones or something, where it's just like everyone's got the capacity for evil. Everyone's got the capacity for good. And until we can come back to that place, it's very, very, very challenging for us to make any progress, any headway. Let me pause and see if there's anything more to add here. I think, in my experience, the most powerful thing is for people to be heard. And when we have stuff like this, we end up with people not being heard. The same thing happened with 9/11. A terrorist attack happened, and then people were like filled with terror, and then just wanted to like put an end straight up to terrorist organizations. And what ended up happening was that the states did a bunch of what I would call reactive invasions, which ended up breeding more terrorists. And so we get caught in this like, but Adam, we have to do something about this. We have to like, we can't just let them blah, blah, blah. And like, there's a truth to that. But what we don't see is our reactivity. And the trouble is then our reactivity actually just recreates the problem. We solve the immediate problem, but we create it again with even more momentum. And so we got to slow down. We have to slow down. Yeah, we have to stop this sort of stuff, but I think we have to like give ourselves time to breathe as well before we run in and start making reactive decisions. And all of that said with an understanding, like, Israel and Palestine don't really have that option, right? But we do. And so I think it's all the more important that we take that on, that we sit in this dissonance and we get curious about this stuff and we really start to bring like compassion to it. So I wish I had a better answer for that. That's the answer I've got. Yeah, that's the answer I've got. How are we doing for time? We're doing pretty good with our, 3 viewers. This is big time influencer chat today. I hope you guys are liking this insight into early influencer creation. This is a new program I'm running called How to Become an Influencer. And, you know, to end up with 300,000 followers, you got to start with 3. And so mark my words, in like, I don't know what it'll be, maybe a few months, maybe a couple of years, we're going to have 300,000 viewers. But right now we're at the 3 stage. And you also have to go up to like 20 and then come back down to 3. So that's part of this process. So you guys are getting inside intel into what it is to be an influencer here. Okay. Tibby. What's up, Tibby? Tibby says, Adam, I've been wondering how to have a need met that depends on a specific person. For example, my daughter has been drawn to mummy much more these days and doesn't want to be with me as much as I would want or need. Can you speak? I think these are two separate questions. Yeah, so that's the first question. So I've been wondering how to have a need met that depends on a specific person. So the example again, my daughter has been drawn to my mom or to her mom much more than me, and I want or I need to be with her. So that can be a tricky one. It's sort of like when, another example might be when you're in a relationship with someone and one person is more like, clingy is not a very kind way to put it. I'm trying to find a better word, but like wants more energy, wants more like connection in the relationship, and the other person is like more pulls away. So like in my relationship, probably I would be more, if you were to like line us up along attachment approaches, I'd be more like avoidant attachment and they would be more anxious attachment. So that's some trauma conversation there, but like the gist of that is that like some people learned to like the approach that they learned growing up in terms of attaching to their parents was like anxious is like I need more, I need more, I need more. As soon as like the primary caregiver like moves away, they like clutch for more. Whereas avoidant would be like as soon as the primary caregiver comes, we're avoidant, we pull away from it. And those two personality types tend to end up in relationship together because like on one hand it's sort of like such a breath of fresh air, like oh my god, you take time for yourself and you follow your own needs, and the other person's like oh my god, you really like give time to everyone, you're so generous with your time. So it's like perfect match. It's almost like we become whole when we come together. And so you can see that a lot in relationships, right? Like the one person, let's say it's the man, just to mix up the traditional stereotypes, like the man's like clingy, I want more of her, and she's pulling away from me. And so what there is to do in these situations is really to recognize like our wants and our needs and to be able to own them as true for us without hooking them, without trying to hook our partner into them. And this is art, challenging art. So the stages along which we move is the first stage is we typically are pretty oblivious to this need. It's all unconscious and it's coming out sideways. Probably because we have a story that it's like wrong to want that. Usually. So like, I want more and more and more of this person, but when I do that, it pushes people away. And so I'm just going to like be okay with them not hanging out with me. And what that does is like it actually undermines your truth. Because your truth is you're not okay with them. You want more of them. So the first stage we have to move into is like coming to a term like, oh, I actually really want more of their energy. I want more of their time. That's the first stage. Have to come to terms with that ourselves. And we kind of have to come to terms with it like almost like a willing acceptance. That's there. The second stage is the practice of like voicing our desires and practicing releasing any significance about how those are met. And this is a big step for everyone in relationship. So many relationships, what we're doing is we're not voicing our desires and then we're building resentment when people don't meet them, which is crazy, but it's what we do. It's just how it goes. We're like, they should know what I want. I shouldn't have to ask for what I want. But that's crazy. You would never expect that of your boss. Hopefully, you'd never expect that of your employees. They should know what to do. I shouldn't have to. I mean, now that I'm saying that, I hear that a lot from leaders and CEOs too. But it doesn't work. So we can hold on to that righteous, like they should know. It just doesn't work. And if you have evidence to prove me wrong, please volunteer it. If you have been like, actually, Adam, I do that and it works perfectly, I would like to know more about that. For most of us, we can pretty easily relinquish this story like, yeah, it just doesn't work even if we want it to work. Even if we have an expectation, it doesn't work. And so we have to start by sharing our desires. And initially, when we start to share these desires, a couple things are going to happen. The first thing is that it's going to be really significant that I'm sharing these desires, because remember, I only just learned to accept that I have them. And so I'm a little bit tender about them. I'm a little bit shaky. And it's kind of vulnerable to ask for it. And from our vulnerability, asking for what we want, we get kind of attached to the result. So this goes back to what Tara had asked, like commitment or heart's desire versus surrendering. So the practice becomes like, hey, I would really, really, really like more time together. Would you be willing to, like, could we create more time? Could we have a date night? Could we do something? So that's the, like, asking for it. And then we have to, like, give our partner the freedom to respond however they respond. Well, I'm really struggling with that. I've got stuff, or like, I don't like you that much, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. We have to kind of, hopefully they're not going to be dicks like that, although that will reveal something to you in your relationship. But our practice is in asking for this and then letting them have their experience. And as we do that more and more, a couple things happen. What initially happens in relationship is we make that request, and because it's significant for us, we attach hooks into it, or we don't make the request very artfully. So instead of making the request directly, I'd like to spend more time together, which is vulnerable. Oh my God, my mustache is killing me. You're killing me, bro. I mean, it's a great mustache, but like, it's poking me every which way. Because it's vulnerable, we don't ask directly. We do things like we complain. It's much safer to complain about what we're not getting than to ask directly about it, because no one can really tell me no to my complaint. It's safe, right? If I just say, you never spend enough time with me, there's no vulnerability in that for me, because you can't really turn around and be like, I'm not going to spend more time with you. I mean, you can say that, but hopefully you get, like, there's an energetic difference between you never spend enough time with me and I really want to spend more time with you. Can we make that happen? The second approach is far more generous because it's far more vulnerable. It's putting more of yourself into the space, and that by its very nature is generous. The complaint puts the finger at your partner, it puts them on the back foot, and then from that place we kind of, there's like a sense of power or something, because they are hooked, right? Now their options are either be a jerk and ignore you and your complaint, or like, I guess we can do that thing. Sure, I'll make more time. And then you're going to get that desire met, but it's going to be from a shitty place. And when someone manipulates us with complaint, guess what that leaves us wanting to do? Spend less time with them. So we have to move into that practice of, like, generously asking for generously and vulnerability. Oh my God, this sentence is killing me. It's like my mustache. Generously and vulnerably asking for what we want. And that becomes our practice. And then we let our partner have their experience. And the hard part about this is, like, sometimes your partner's going to be like, I don't want that right now. And we have to kind of let that land in our nervous system before we respond. So much of, like, polarity and relational work, like deep polarity and relational work, is slowing down our reactivity, making vulnerable requests, and then, like, letting things happen and, like, breathing and sitting in the result for a while. So all of that's been about relationship. We should talk about what Tibby's asking, which is, like, situation with his daughter. So the other thing that's really important in these practices is when we recognize I have a want of this other person, the first thing we have to do is be willing to sit with that want unmet. Because the most powerful way we can make a request of someone is from a place of unattachment, from a place of not needing them to make a decision one way or the other. When I first started working with ayahuasca, I came home like a lunatic. I came home and, like, the light of God was shining out of my eyes, and I was zealous about the experience I'd had, which many people are, and not just with ayahuasca. This happens with, like, Landmark Forum, powerful coach training, Tony Robbins, anything, right? Therapy. I came home and I was like, oh my God, I got this vision. We're going to be working down there and you're going to join me. And I really want you to come do this work with me. So many hooks, so much attachment. And the second time I went down and worked with this medicine, it was probably like the fifth or sixth time I'd worked with the medicine at this point. But, like, the second time I went back to Costa Rica, it was about 2 years later. And I'd had time to like slow down, to calm myself. I had 2 years of deep transformational work under my belt again after working with my coach and everything. And I came home in a much different place. I was still super clear that I felt like she was going to join me in this work and engage in this work with me and like do all this stuff. But I also felt very clear in my heart that like it was okay if she was a no. I wasn't going to push her. I wasn't going to make anything happen. And I was okay if that didn't happen in this lifetime. I was just going to share. I really felt that. I still had that desire, but it's okay how it went. And from that place, she actually had the ability to choose in. From the place I was coming initially, she didn't really have no as an option. I was kind of like, it's going to happen. We have to do this. So she had no choice. I'd taken her choice away from her. And when no isn't an option, what people will do is cling to it even more. And that's why asking from a place free of attachment is so much more powerful, because we actually give them the option to choose. And so what there is for us to do, and what there probably is for you to do, Tibby, is to like really sit in the anguish or the pain or the discomfort of your daughter not wanting to spend time with you right now. And that's heartbreaking for a parent. That's the most heartbreaking, right? Like, our children are amazing. We want to spend time with them every last minute. Grimby, is Grimby here? No, he came in and he left. I'm going to use the door closing stick right here to close the door. There we go. Close that door again. You can come up on your bed, Grimby. It's available for you right there if you want. So we have to sit in the pain of like not getting that need met. And that's edgy work. Because there's no resolution to it. There's no like anything other than like, I'm willing to feel the sadness, or I'm willing to feel the heartbreak that comes from just not getting to spend as much time with my daughter, my teacher, my my whatever as I would like. And as we sit in that, eventually we become willing to allow that to be there. We no longer are, we become able to be with it. And from that place, then, we can make genuine offers to people that they are genuinely able to say yes or no to. So from there, you create a freedom for yourself and for your daughter to like actually let her choose. That becomes so generous and so vulnerable. So that's the practice, ironically, is like, what do we do when we have a need that depends on a specific person? How do we get it met? You learn to be okay with having it unmet. And then you practice asking for it. And if we do those two things, a lot of freedom starts to open up for ourselves, because we no longer require something of the other person, because we are able to sit with whatever's showing up, but we can now make requests that are more likely to get a yes from that lack of requirement. This is the heart of like deep relational work, is this coming to terms with like being all right, holding the fire of discomfort that comes in relationships, be they mother-daughter, father-daughter, husband-wife, wife-wife, husband-husband, etc., etc. Okay, 11 o'clock. I think I'm going to hit one more of these. Then I think we're going to wind down. And I think Mia, I want to read what you wrote, Jess. Jess says, often all the answers you've given felt like a breath from over here. Thank you for bringing compassion to an anger-filled topic. Thanks, Jess. Thanks for that reflection. I really appreciate that. And you also say, Jess also says, often I find the work done to get to the point of actually voicing my desire allows for some release of expectations naturally, not fully, but some. A lot of the tension is stored in the build-up, stockpiling of our voice. Yes, that's so true. So true. And so when we learn to be okay with not having a particular need met, and I'm not talking about like basic fundamental needs, I'm talking about like, I want more time with this person, that kind of need. When we learn to be okay with that, then our voice starts to flow much more freely. And then we can it just opens up so much for this stuff. As an aside, so much of coach training, leadership training is like what I'm describing here. It's people learning to recognize their unconscious needs or desires, and then learning to let themselves sit in the discomfort of not having those addressed. A lot of times what's going when people first come into this work is that they've got all of these unconscious desires and needs that they're totally unaware of, and in fact are committed to the belief that they don't have them. Oh, I don't need people. I'll give you an example. A leader who's like, I don't like the attention. I don't like to take the spotlight. I don't need it. And then they get up to like thank their team, and the entire acknowledgement ends up being like this weird side swipe brag about themselves and how they put this team together, and it's all about them. And what's happening is that they have a need, and then they've got a story that that need's wrong, and then they have a belief about how they actually show up in contrast to that need. And barking at Grimby. And so they have to we have to pull those layers back. First, oh, you've got a belief that it's wrong. Oh, you actually have a tremendous need. And oh, you're getting this meat net sideways. We got to pull all that down. And what you have to do is learn to sit with the discomfort of not being recognized, rather than telling yourself you're okay with that while actually being uncomfortable with that fact. Okay. Mia, you asked about, can you talk about choosing out of a context? So I wrote a post about this morning called, Getting Out of the Wagon Rut. So I want to talk about what a context is and then how we escape it. Talk about how it works. And this is the heart and soul of how we are stuck in our lives, all of us. So what happens is we have like a story about ourselves, like I'm too much. That's a pretty common story many of us can relate to. I'm too much. I take up too much space. I'm too loud. I speak for too long, blah, 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 blah. So that's the belief we have for ourselves. And so the obvious answer to that, the solution that we create is like, oh, I'm going to not take up any space. I will be small. I will be minimal. And we think that's like this drastic, radical, transformational shift. Oh my God, I'm not taking up space anymore. This is like life-changing. And at first it'll feel that way because novelty always feels transformational and life-changing at first. That shift will be like, oh, you don't understand, Adam. This is a huge shift for me. And I believe you about that. I believe that this is initially like a big change. But what we can't see is that it's like there's a wagon rut that we're stuck in. And the wagon rut is called being too much or being not enough. And inside of a wagon rut, you're not paralyzed. You have a direction you can travel in. You can go forward or backwards. So forward would be like, I'm going to double down. Fuck it. I'm always worried about being too much. I'm going to stop caring about being too much. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop worrying about being too much. So now what you've done is you're still being too much. You've just eliminated your ability to be present to the impact of that. You no longer care. You've become callous and kind of a little bit sociopathic about it. I have no more empathy for people. What a solution. I feel great. Except you don't, but never mind that. So that's forward in the wagon rut. And then backwards along the wagon rut would be in the opposite direction. So it's like, I'm going to be small. I'm not going to take up space. And what happens is there's this part of you that's still yearning to be seen. That's the reason you're too much in the first place, is there's this ultimate desire to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, to have an impact in the space. But now what you're doing is you're quelling that part of yourself. You're keeping yourself small when you actually might have something to say. You're keeping yourself tiny when you actually really want to shine. You're hanging out on the side of the stage when you actually want to be front of the stage. You're resenting the person that's at the front of the stage when, you get the idea. And so while it seems like we've created this radical shift, we're actually caught in the exact same wagon rut. And pretty much every recurring problem that you experience exists inside some wagon rut like this. I had one, it was a client a long time ago, one of my earliest clients, and what they were working through was like, they were like, oh, I always end relationships. Like I'm dating people and then I always end the relationship after like 3 days. So now what I'm doing is I'm staying in the relationship, even if I want to leave. And it's like, yeah, that's like cool, but they weren't doing anything to create any elevation or to understand any deeper. They were just like forcing themselves to stay past the point of wanting to leave. And so that wagon rut, that particular wagon rut, we could call, I want to leave the relationship. And then they've got two ways that they can be inside of it, two actions they can do. They can leave the relationship, or they can operate over top of wanting to leave and just stay. I don't know if you've ever dated someone where they didn't want to be dating you, but they were like forcing themselves to do it. It sucks. It's not a good relationship either. So this is the way a context works. There's like it's like a pendulum of extremes. Two different sides we can hang out on, and they're both actually the same rut that we're caught in. And so getting out of the rut, what we do, and I'm going to make this very, very quick and simple. It was a quick and dirty approach. There's much more to it than this. Like, we might really explore the limits and bounds of this wagon rut and how it benefits them and all that. But the simple answer to this is, when we're trying to get out of a wagon rut, what we want to do is create a stand for ourselves. And a stand is a way of being that is completely unrelated to what's in the rut. It's not a fix for it. It's not changing it. It's not related to it in any way, shape, or form. So the fix, like an example that wouldn't be a good stand, would be like, okay, I'm too much, or I'm keeping myself small. It might be like, someone might be like, okay, my stand will be, everyone wants to see me. That's a total fix for I'm too much. Hopefully you can see that. Like, oh, that just directly kind of solves the problem of believing you're too much. And anytime you're trying to solve something in the wagon rut, you're back in the wagon rut. Because the truth is, it's made up in the first place. It's all your mind. And then your mind trying to solve the problem, and then the solution to the problem putting you back in the wagon rut, and so on and so forth. A more powerful stand might be something like connection. I'm going to stand for creating connection. And then in those moments when you're like, am I being too much? Am I being too little? Do I need to turn myself up? Do I need to turn myself down? Instead, you can engage with this from a wholly different place, completely outside of the wagon rut. What would create more connection in this moment? And you can go along those lines. And what that does, it gets you up and out of the reactivity, the stuckness of the wagon rut, and allows you to play an entirely different game. And so when people hear this, they get frustrated because they're like, well, that's dumb. Like, that's not going to solve my problem. And that's the magic of it. It's not going to solve your problem, because your problem is a problem of your own making. And you trying to solve your problem just reinforces that it's a problem. And then that keeps you in the rut. So I'll finish by giving like a kind of somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, somewhat unrelated, little bit of a out of left field example, but I think it kind of serves this purpose a bit. I was in ceremony, and I drank the medicine, and I was like tossing and turning on my mattress. I was having a hard time dropping in, letting myself be with what was going on. And I turned to my friend who was working that night, and I said, hey, can you support me? And he was like, yeah, what's going on? I was like, I feel really like resistant. Like I'm not willing to let the medicine in. And she's trying to reach me, but I'm having a hard time, letting her. And he paused and sort of turned away, and then he turned back, and he was like, yes, hello, Grimby. He was like, the way you're describing this, it actually sounds like you're like open to what's happening. It doesn't really sound like you're resistant. It doesn't sound like you're resisting anything. You sound pretty clear. So you might consider you're actually not resistant. And I was like, what? Well, I really feel like I'm having a hard time like settling in here. And he said, yeah, like it sounds like you're in your process, but there's just some discomfort with your process. Like, it's just not comfortable being with it. And if you're creating a story about that discomfort, if you're creating the story that you are resistant, then what's going to happen next is you're going to try to figure out how to not be resistant. So now you're putting all this energy into overcoming a problem that's actually not there in the first place. And that's going to get you into a loop where you're now trying to like overcome this made up problem, and you're just going to be stuck there because it's not the problem in the first place. So you're not going to be able to move through it. And as soon as he gave me that, and I was like, oh, yeah, what if I'm not being resistant? I'm just in, this is just an uncomfortable process. I'm just in the discomfort of it. Then I could like let go of this story. Like, how do I let myself be more open? How do I let myself drop the resistance? I could stop all of that. And I could just be like, I'm just going to practice being in the discomfort of this. And that let me drop in. And so that's an example where I could be like, I need to kill this resistance. It's just going to keep me in that wagon rut forever. And all there really was to do was just like be with the discomfort. So that's what we're doing when we practice like a stand instead of trying to solve the wagon rut. Is it's like taking you out of this problem of your mind, this problem that you created from a very young age. I'm not saying the problem hasn't been there for a long, long time. And I'm not saying that the problem hasn't been made manifest in your life. Because that's what happens when we start to believe a problem is real in our mind, which happens at the ages of like 3 to 4. We then start to try to solve for it, and our solutions actually create that problem. It makes the problem real. And then we get caught in that wagon rut for 20, 30, 40 years of our life, trying to overcome it ever more artfully. And it becomes ever more entrenched in our lives. And this is why that stand, as Just puts it, the annoying moment when the stand is the simple solution that you don't want to look at. When we come up with a stand like this is why it's kind of frustrating, it's annoying, it feels like dumb, and it works like a miracle because it takes it out of trying to solve for something that's not there in the first place. All right, well, I'm going to go and get ready for the weekend. I hope that you guys have awesome weekends planned. Jess, Monica, who else was here with us today? Tommy, it was so good to have you guys here. Thanks for being part of we have 2 viewers now. Thanks for being part of the Influencer Starter Pack. That's what this was, is the Influencer Starter Pack. Have an amazing weekend, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.